Welcome to another Westeros.org video on A Song of Ice and Fire. Today we are going to be examining life and death, or rather the way people might return to life after being dead or mostly dead in A Song of Ice and Fire. And we're going to be using a couple of quotes as the basis for the discussion, as a starting point to sort of give a sense of both what some of the characters think and some of the things that George R. R. Martin has said about the subject as well.
Only death can pay for life, my lord. A great gift requires a great sacrifice. That is Melton Shai, obviously putting forward her notions of how magic works. You have to sacrifice something to get life back.
I mean, even her shadow magic, we know, uses Stannis' life force.
Yeah.
So to give birth to these unnatural creatures requires life force, as if it's not surprising with if that's part of a duality of Valorianism, for example, the idea that there's only a finite amount of life force and you can sort of trade it back and forth. On the other hand, it may not necessarily, as we will get into, be a facet of Valorianism.
No, absolutely true. I mean, the first time we ever hear that phrase, the idea only death may pay for life, is Mirri Maz Duur speaking to Daenerys when Dany asks her to save Drogo. And Mirri says she learned this from a blood mage from the Shadowlands beyond the Shai. And it cost her dearly to learn this magic that she was going to do. Now, of course, her magic... There's all sorts of questions. I mean, obviously, maybe this might be illustrated to start going through people who've come back.
Yes.
For example, I mean, Drogo is the obvious example. I mean, Mirri wants revenge. That's what she reveals, that all of this at the end is an elaborate revenge.
It's difficult to decide which parts are her doing.
Yeah.
Which parts are, like, for example, did she poison his wound from the get-go, or was it the fact that he didn't follow her instructions?
She says it's because he didn't follow the instructions. And
she doesn't really have a reason to lie, perhaps, about that.
Yeah, she said, I mean, obviously the opportunity presented itself, and she took it. But on the other hand, she said, you shouldn't have gone into the tent. I told you not to. Dany didn't have a choice. Jorah carries her in, but she implies that maybe all the things that happened weren't necessary to her plan.
No. And there, if we look at the world of Ice and Fire and the resulting sort of misshaped, scaled whatever thing that Dany gives birth to, you have the whole thing about him being long dead. That is perhaps another aspect of it, but these sort of strange births have happened before with Targaryens, particularly in the presence of magic.
Yeah, absolutely true.
So perhaps just the fact that she's Targaryen, the magic that is innate to them somehow, whether if they really shared blood with dragons, that does something to disrupt what Mirri does.
It might have. I mean, I guess just focusing on Drogo. I mean, he was dying from his infected wound.
Was he dead?
Did
he die?
Did he die, and then was he brought back? I mean, that's a real question. Did Drogo die? Was he resurrected, or was he magically healed? It's appealing for some reasons to think he did that, or either she killed him as part of a process of bringing him back, or he died and she brought him back. Because what we get is he's healed, but it's a shell. It's the Drogo is gone. He's not home. The soul is the spirit, the consciousness is no longer there. It's just an empty husk.
Yeah.
And this is important for what we'll be discussing towards the end, because it has some implications for what may be happening in the Winds of Winter.
On the other hand, she presumably paid for his... I mean, she claims at least that she paid for it with the horse sacrifice.
Well, she tells Dany she knew what the real price was going to be, which was the child.
Yeah.
The horse was show, really, is the implication.
Or did it have, because again, the whole Targaryen bit, did it in fact mean that the death of the child was a side effect of Daenerys being exposed to magic. The horse paid for Drogo to be resurrected, but can a horse pay for the restoration of a human soul?
There's a lot of question
lot of
marks
things you could ask
over this thing, because Miri was entering into a duplicitous situation. She wasn't intending to bring back a healthy, happy Drogo. She was planning.
Could she have been intending to? I mean, was she intending both to have Drogo brought back the way he was, as in mindless, and killing the child, or was it one or the?
Well, because she implies that because that happened because Dany went into the tent and that she shouldn't have gone into it. So I mean, it's complicated. Miri seems to have had things. I think basically things went well beyond what she imagined would happen.
Because remember, the one she really wants to kill is a child. With the prophecy, she fears the stallion and wants the world.
Yeah.
Drogo may have been the side effect of Dany going into the tent and screwing up the whole thing, that you got him back that way and the child dead.
And of course, people then question, could the death of Rhaego not have anything directly? But is that the death paid ultimately for the lives of the dragons coming,
rather than Miri being burned on the pyre?
Yeah. So I think the important thing to get out of this actually is that George doesn't work magic if there's a clear-cut systematic way of how things work.
No.
This Dany's situation at the end is miraculous, and it's not something, as George said,
Targaryen's not fireproof.
They're not fireproof. It's not. It was a one-time. It was a kind of a unique magical conflux of events, and magic
fulfillment of prophecy and all of that can override there is magic, and then there's miracle. It seems like magic can do certain things, and then there are, as I said, a conflux of events of prophecy, the right timing, and all of that can produce very unexpected results.
Let's move on to somebody else who kind of has a similarity to Drogo. Sir Robert Strong, the revenant sort of Gregor Clegane. First, did he die? Did he die at all? Qyburn
seemed pretty certain that he was going to die from the poison. And Taini said that it was a certain death.
Yes, but Qyburn does stuff.
He does stuff.
Is it along the lines of what Miri did? Did he kind of kill Gregor and then return him? Did he... Look, I mean, we do know that he's used people in some fashion, some horrible fashion in his experiments.
And it's been a way that they've sort of been used up gradually.
Yes, I think she said
there's not much left of...
He said that she was quite used up or something, I think. So there's something that is he draining them of blood to kind of keep him going? This is obviously...
Or is it related to the whole life force using that Melisandre does to create the shadows? Yeah. Is it something like that?
Here we're having basically a maester applying the scientific method to magic. And we don't know exactly the process. But it works. So is Gregor... Well, I mean, clearly people are dying to sustain him. So even if he... So
do they have to keep dying?
He needed more people.
So it may be that he has achieved a state of sort of, I've got him, he's kind of like a vampire sort of, but he's a constructed vampire in that he has to keep sustaining his life force somehow.
I mean, as Kevin says, I mean, they're reporting the other King's Guard, he doesn't sleep, he doesn't eat, he doesn't go to the privy, he's not...
I mean, I'm pretty sure, can't be pretty sure, but it seems likely that both he and Drogo had to, I mean, they were dying from various things. So I think that in both cases, Mirrormaster and Qyburn had to let them die from whatever was killing them. And then to stop that process, the poison, I mean, it's an infection in Drogo's case and the poison in Gregor's case, you have to kind of let that kill them, and then you can do something to reanimate them.
Yeah.
But with Gregor's case, it might be literally that he is continuously being reanimated.
Yeah, that's the... It's very strange. It's obviously, again, George definitely likes leaving it mysterious. Magic is not supposed to for him at least, magic is not
There's no
something
system. Like,
yeah.
you do this spell and that spell. And
we can rank people in terms of who's more powerful for the next. I mean, it's valid to use systems that have that, and I'm sure I know people enjoy them, like the Wheel of Time with the whole channelers and things. Yes. But George for him, magic has to, if it starts becoming too systematic, then it starts approaching, science fiction for him, because then he says, oh, it's telekinesis and it's telepathy and so on, and they can say, okay, who's a stronger telepath, who's a stronger, which is all, it's kind of pseudoscience, but it's a trope of science fiction. But magic doesn't work that way. Magic
moves in mysterious ways.
It's magical. Yes. We've got one more that is a bit of on the side, and then we're going to start hitting some of the major ones before we get to discussing what happens to Jon. We were racking our brains for other people who had sort of died and come back, and one that came to mind, of course, is Patchface. Patchface is a character who
pretty much has to have. I mean, he was lost at sea and kind of looks drowned, and he's a bit bloated, right? I think his skin has a little bit of pasty. Yeah.
I mean, Creston says that they swore that he was washed up on shore, but he was not breathing, and suddenly he was awake. But he was this clever, entertainer, mummer, slave boy who Lord Baratheon had bought and freed to bring to Storm's End. And then after this, his mind was broken. I know. And at the same time, he seems to be speaking truths or strange prophetic things or observations that people are arguing. I mean, people have said and they've tried to show. I mean, they're so obscure that no one's gone like 100%. Like this is definitely this and this is definitely that. But there are some things that are kind of suggestive. But the important thing about him is
And Melisandre fears him. She thinks he's a dangerous creature, and she's seen skulls and blood around him and blood on his lips.
Sometimes in the flames, yeah. So there's something there. To me, the real question is, okay, if we have that quote, only death can pay for life. So, okay, with Drogo, well, definitely there's death around him, and when he comes back, if he was resurrected, or at least his life was preserved through magic, but the soul checked out. Gregor is this automaton monster
and there's
creature.
Definitely lots of deaths paying for him moving
Patchface, though, who died for him. Now, one way, obviously, is he's mad now. He's driven. I mean, maybe the death of
but there were other people who died on the ship.
Yeah, that's true. Others died on that ship. Maybe their deaths. But also, I mean, what is the agency? Is there an agency? I mean, I know there are people who say, "Oh, Merlings. He's an agent of the Merling King."
I mean, what he looks like is like an actual return from the drowned god.
Yeah.
In a sense, he was very literally drowned, as opposed to just being, fake drowned and resuscitated.
Yeah.
He was actually drowned and came back to life. So, if you were to assume an agency, the drowned god would seem. But then again, we're back to the whole gods and...
Yeah, I think it's something... Maybe there's this
because then you start kind of looking at, have all the presumed gods been involved in resurrecting agents?
Yeah.
And we've got people who'd argue that Lancel died and was brought back by the Seven, for example.
Well, we've seen that.
But there has been...
Yeah.
Because he was very sickly and now he's, extremely frail and has had this religious conversion and... so have all the presumed gods gone in and resurrected agents? I mean,
yeah, I think
I find it hard to believe, but Patchface is a curious one
because he doesn't kind of fall. Everyone else has. I mean, there's a pattern kind of to everyone else, and he kind of stands outside of it, and mostly because we kind of know who the agents are. Miri, Qyburn, but not him. He just. Obviously, there's always a possibility that he actually was breathing and the person was mistaken. So there's that. Now, a couple of big ones. But then
how do you explain the prophetic ability, honestly?
Is it prophetic? I mean, it's unclear. I mean, there's bits that... the main bit that he's ever said was where people took his remarks about, blood on a maiden's thigh, but he was referring to the Red Wedding.
Yeah.
He was... But he foresaw that and he was saying it. But others are really just weird, and it's hard to say how much of, if he's a big red herring, basically, or George kind of, even a broken clock tells time, twice a day. Maybe, most of his stuff is just complete nonsense, and then he just happens to come up with some nonsense that happens to fit events.
But then Melisandre.
Melisandre, well, she's concerned about him, but it's because she sees skulls and there's red on his blood on his lips, but she doesn't know what that means, and we have no idea what it means either.
True.
So, okay, the next two are kind of big, and these are important. We have the resurrections that come by the route of Valorian magic belief. It's not a bit unclear. It's first, obviously, Beric. Beric Dondarrion is a big one. He's the one that people hold up and say, well, look, no one died for Beric to come back. There's no sacrifice for him in that sort of death for life way. Thoros, okay, it's all new to him. I mean, this idea that he was just giving a sort of a death rite, a religious rite, the Lord's, fiery kiss, and
obviously there's a sense there in that, the fiery kiss, because we know that, Melisandre talks about fire as a life force in her, so the idea that the Lord sort of shares some of his life force with his...
But it's a death rite. It's for people who are dying. It's kind of like, it's like the last rites you're giving. Or a blessing for the dead.
Yeah, and apparently here it decided to instead wake him up.
Yeah, which is Thoros. Now, Thoros reveals, again, I come from the perspective that there isn't a Lord, there's no real gods, and George has more or less said, they don't really have a role directly, at least. But in any case... So
they're not going to come on stage and do things directly. Doesn't mean that there isn't a force out there.
Well, there's the magic force. Yes. I think Thoros had a gift for... He could sometimes see things in the flames, and so they taught him. But magic, when he was growing up, it was a much weaker affair. All of a sudden, it's become, from the birth of the dragons, we're told, again and again. The pyromancer says wildfire has become much more potent. Quaife comments on the fire mage that before he couldn't even, wake fire from dragon glass, and now he can do his fabulous fire ladder and disappear in midair and things. And magic has returned with a vigor. And although, we say the dragons,
or maybe the dragons came back because magic was coming back.
Maybe magic, the others have woken up. Those direwolves showed up kind of coincidentally. That
we don't know what is the chicken and what's the egg, or what's the dragon and what's the egg in this case.
So Thoros had no expectation of waking, but Beric woke. So the question is who died to bring him to life? And well, the answer there is something that Beric reveals. Beric dies, as in the personhood, the self, the consciousness that is Beric. Each time he comes back, there's less and less of him. He's forgetting things. He doesn't remember who. He knows he's been told there's a woman he's supposed to marry. He doesn't remember her. Even something as fundamental as favorite food, doesn't remember it anymore.
No. It's like that fire burns away things when it's...
Yeah, he doesn't remember his mother. He kind of, and it wasn't exactly serious, but, where you ask, are you my mother, Thoros? It's sort of, it's a very depressing remark about the state of him that Thoros might as well be, because he doesn't remember. And all he has left is this drive to do, this thing
it's a purpose that keeps him going, in a sense that whatever decided that if something decided that he was going to has a use for him, and keeps him coming back because of that.
Now, a few years back, George, way back, George had a remark about the Lord of the Rings, which he absolutely adores them. But one of his critiques is Gandalf should have stayed dead. It was his critique, and at the time we're talking like Game of Thrones and A Clash of Kings. Okay, but come A Storm of Swords, we meet Beric Dondarrion. and at the end of Storm of Swords, we meet the character we're talking about next. And people say, well, hey, George, how does that work? You said, people should stay dead, they should come back. Well, I think I kind of remark, well, if you come back as a brain-eating zombie, that's something else entirely. Or, and more recently, he kind of...
Gandalf comes back better, is what he...
Yeah.
Obviously, this has to do with Tolkien's view of that sort of sacrifice. That can, I think...
Yeah, and the cosmology, when Gandalf was an angelic spirit, and but basically, by that sacrifice, it was sort of...
He rose in sort of... or got access to more...
it's sort of...
It fits the cosmology.
It fits the cosmology very well. But so what he said is... So he remarked, this is an interview with John Hodgson, the actor, comedian, and he's remarking how it grabbed him, Gandalf dying, when he was a young kid reading The Lord of the Rings for the first time. And then he comes back as Gandalf the White, and he's more powerful, and Tina didn't like Gandalf the White as much as he liked Gandalf the Grey. Now, then he admits, my characters who come back, it's a pretty long quote, so but my characters who come back from death are worse for wear. In some ways, they're not even the same characters anymore. The body may be moving, but some aspect of the spirit is changed or transformed, and they've lost something. One of the characters who has come back repeatedly from death is Beric Dondarrion, the Lightning Lord. Each time he's revived, he loses a little more of himself. He was sent on a mission before his death, he was sent on a mission to do something, and it's like, that's what he's clinging to. He's forgetting other things. He's forgetting who he is, or where he lived. He's forgotten a woman who he was once supposed to marry. Bits of his humanity are lost every time he comes back from death. He remembers that mission. His flesh is falling away from him, but this one thing, this purpose that he had in part, is part of what's animating him and bringing him back to life. I think you see echoes of that with some of the other characters that have come back from death. So that's very, really, because that's the cost. If there's a death, it's a death of his humanity. I mean, to the point where he doesn't even remember himself anymore. He's just his purpose. And the next other character, Beric ultimately asks, the writing, they find a body on the Trident, on the river, and it's that of Catelyn Stark, dead probably several days in that water. And he asks Thoros to give her the kiss, and Thoros recoils. She's been decomposing. He can't, and Thoros refuses, and Beric does it himself and meets his final death. The fire that has kept him going goes into her, and Lady Stoneheart comes, and she's not Catelyn Stark at all. That's the thing people have to... She has the memories of Catelyn. She's
almost the opposite of Catelyn in some ways, because where Catelyn, in life spoke against vengeance, Lady Stoneheart is
that's
nothing
all.
But it's vengeance. That's all that's driving her. Obviously, she more or less went mad before she died.
She totally mad at death, yes.
And what came back is rational in a sense, but it has been turned into just this one purpose, and that's vengeance.
Yeah, and she is merciless. She does terrible things, and it's all that moves her.
Yeah.
So again, Catelyn died, so that Lady Stoneheart could live.
Exactly.
So as far as I can see, other than those uncertain cases of where Drogo was dead or not, but in her case and Beric's, I think it's quite clear that maxim still holds, because the death of self.
Yeah.
It's the sacrifice of self that is happening with that particular magic. Maybe it's all about the way... we discussed already how magic
is the whole only death can pay for life? Is that what they teach? What the blood mages teach? Is that a way around that? If you resurrect someone without paying that, they will be paying the price. However, you could sacrifice someone else and sort of steal their life for the person.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously have the weird Drogo situation that we don't know exactly why he's mindless, and I think, yeah, no, it's all very complicated. When I set it out, I thought, oh, okay, this will be pretty straightforward to discuss. But the fact is that there's a lot of question marks, and that obviously it's very deliberate on George's part.
I mean, maybe Drogo became mindless as part of just the process of dying. Maybe he had a brain damage.
Yeah, I could see that. So, let's get to the second half of this then, which is basically all about Jon. And if you were to return, how does it work, and what's the costs? There's some interesting possibilities. If Jon is returned, then how does he return? We have, obviously, the scariest route is whites. The whites are something else entirely, because they're undead. They're not living. They're not returned to life. They are animated by magic. They're actual puppets of the others.
They're definitely, they don't really have to pay for their lives because they don't have a life per se. They have no agency of their own at all.
And I guess we could touch on Cold Hands, because Cold Hands is an interesting one. Special case. Those who've watched the TV show only, you haven't met this guy. They've cut him out. Cold Hands is a character who shows up in Storm of Swords to rescue Sam and Gilly at a necessary point, and then to help Bran and Mira, Jojen, and Hodor find their way towards the Three-Eyed Crow. And he has the black hands of a white. He doesn't breathe. He doesn't eat.
Does he have the blue eyes? No?
No, he has black eyes. And this is important because there's a lot of theories about who he is, like, is he vengeance? But the black eyes says, I mean, he's someone who had dark eyes.
And actually, we do have that little bit, in fact, which, I mean, we had the eyes already, but there's that tiny little spoiler as well, which got out from when somebody looked at the manuscripts that are stored of the books and
at Texas A&M University's archives.
In Storm of Swords, was it Anne?
I think Anne, when Cold Hands introduced, she asked in the margins, "Is this mentioned?" And then George has had a very saying, "No."
Yeah.
So at least
it wasn't strange that we hit, or that people hit on that theory when even the editor hit on it, but was rebuffed.
Yeah, I mean, at least at the time it was a no, but I would guess it's no, because again, the black eyes, like, why not say he had gray eyes?
Yeah.
Or blue gray or whatever we call it. I think Benjamins are blue gray. Anyways,
he seems to have been partially reclaimed somehow.
Yes.
If it's, the children or the Three-Eyed Crow that have done it, but he seems to have gotten his consciousness back, or if he somehow never fully. I don't think he could have. It's hard to say. Something at least started the process of
turning him into white, and then he was arrested back, or the soul was put back in, or a bit unclear. But so that's an interesting route. But
I suppose it might possibly connect to Jon in that sense, for the whole putting souls back into a star.
Yeah, well, I mean, what you have is you have Melisandre there, and Melisandre might hit on the idea that he's the one who's really was the prince who was promised. He's Azor Ahai. I need to bring him back.
Once she realizes that when she tries to see her, Azor Ahai and Stannis in the flames, her king, right? She keeps seeing Snow.
Yeah. Okay, so first, does she just give his body the funeral rites or death rites? Does she try to give him the Lord's kiss, and does he then just wake up? Not by intention, just like Thoros didn't intend it. So there's always a possibility that he accidentally gets resurrected. But, or does she go out and try blood magic? Now, with blood magic, she absolutely believes there has to be a sacrifice for it to work. Someone has to die for someone else to live. That raises possibilities as well. And I guess some people might argue that this is, that Shireen's death might come from her deciding, I'll burn Shireen to bring back Jon. Now, I'm very certain that Stannis has to have a hand in this, but maybe Stannis gets back and says, well, we have to bring him back, and she'll say, well, the only way is
Yeah, I find it hard for him to make that decision for
Jon.
John because sort of thinking about it now, I'm leaning towards, because more or less the whole of the watch kind of has been converted, or as in Melisandre has kind of got Valor holding sway, so to speak.
Among some.
Among some, but I mean, it's under Stannis is supposed to be the official.
Yeah.
So the idea that she would get to give the death rites seems reasonable.
Yeah.
They are on one of the hinges of the world where her magic is much stronger.
This is true. This is absolutely true.
I think it is very likely that whether she intends it or not, because if she doesn't hit on the idea that Jon is Azor Ahai Reborn or the prince who was promised, she's not going to try and resurrect him. I don't think so.
No.
She already has some sense that he's important, but I don't know about her trying to sacrifice someone. So, let's say she just gives the death rites. And he wakes up, or rather, his body wakes up. I don't think Jon's going to be in there.
No, but we've discussed this before, the resurrection of Jon, like when it would happen. And for us, it doesn't feel like it'd be an early thing,
No.
right? I mean, to me, it feels like that something that moment is, I think, structurally,
Yes,
we could be wrong, but
I used to think that the resurrection of Jon's body and the restoration of Jon's soul would be in close proximity. My inclination now is that he will get the death rites from Melisandre fairly
back.
early. His body will come back. I don't think that this is something that's going to be widely publicized around the wall. But some people might realize that this is the case. And then we have that little notion from Dance with Dragons that Jon is storing bodies in the wall, right, to see if they'll turn into whites.
Yes, and they weren't waking up.
So if they have Jon's body resurrected, but where the heck is Jon? If somebody gets the inclination that maybe we can do something to fix this, where would they put his body to make sure?
Well, body if he's back.
If he's back, yeah, that's true.
They wouldn't go stick him in an ice cell. I don't think. I mean,
that's true. So yeah, because we do think that the ice cells is there's a point to that him bringing that up.
The other route you could see is it's complicated, but okay. We're dancing on a separate point here. Of course, is that however he's brought back,
we think his soul is somewhere else.
He's gonna be like Drogo. I think he's gonna be mindless shell, and
regardless of actually of whether they sacrifice someone
or they use the fire, the kiss method.
And of course, if he gets brought back and it's a mindless husk, despite the sacrifice having been done, Melisandre is going to be pretty surprised.
Indeed.
Most likely. Because she's not going to count on what most people suspect, and which I think is extremely likely given the setup that we get in A Dance with Dragons, that since his last thought is of Ghost, he has had his consciousness transported into the wolf. No, he's not warged into him.
His skin changed.
His skin's changed in, because the prologue of the book sets up that one thing that skin changers and wargs can do to extend their life somewhat beyond death is that with the death of the body, they can transport their mind into someone else. I mean, they could take a person.
Well, you never do that.
No,
and we see why.
Yes.
Vormir tries it and it's a complete failure.
Yes, but you can definitely put yourself into an animal and survive as long as you're gonna start fading, but for a time at least you're with the animal there, and that's an extension of your life.
Speaking of animals, one moment. Hey, Breeze. Sorry about that. That was Breeze reminding us that it was his lunchtime. But speaking of animals, where were we? So we have various scenarios that we have here about what you can do, because skin changers, who are particularly powerful skin changers, can slip into the skin of an animal as they're dying and basically pass their consciousness into that animal and live a second life.
Jon doesn't have that training, of course. He has very little training as a skin changer, but Boromir did note when he met Jon, or afterwards rather, reflecting on Jon, that he was very powerful.
Yeah, so maybe that's enough. Maybe just the raw power and ability allowed him to instinctually, because he says ghost name, as Linda said, so maybe he did reach out for him and put his consciousness there. So we have scenarios. Melisandre uses blood magic. She sacrifices someone to bring him back, and
he's not at home.
The body comes back, but he's not at home. Or she doesn't sacrifice anyone. She just gives the death rites. She gives the death rites, and sort of that whatever weird magical thing happened with Beric happens with Jon, and he comes back, but still he's not there. Now the cost of that return was a change, as George said in that quote, but you come back and you're changed, you're transformed in some way.
Does that apply when Jon is not at home when it happens?
Yeah,
the blood magic route seems more likely.
I do feel it's more likely.
Just because we've had her say that as well.
That's how she doesn't know anything about what Foros has done. She knows nothing about it. So literally, if he wakes up from the funeral, that death rite, that's an accident. She had no intention of doing it. I would prefer if she had an intentional plan to bring him back.
That of course requires her. I mean, this could be the case where, if Stannis dies, well, we're pretty certain that Stannis isn't that long for this world. So then somebody has to make a decision for some reason to preserve Jon's body.
Yeah.
In the in the ice under the wall. Why would somebody make that decision? Just out of
obviously there is the aftermath of this assassination. I mean,
there could be some political aspect, so to speak.
There's a political aspect. The people, the conspirators who did it, may be denounced by others, and for some reason, Jon's body is held in state for some reason. It's all murky stuff. The Winds of Winter has a lot of big questions hanging over it, over what's going to happen to various people, and this is one of central.
Does someone there realize that his consciousness is in Ghost, and they need to wait and see if they can get his body back?
Yeah.
I mean, could that be? I mean, could Melisandre recognize that his consciousness is in Ghost, but doesn't have the means of trying to resurrect him at the moment?
No, you'll need somebody who has some ability, perhaps with skin changing, or some other relevant magic ability, like a certain young boy under a tree, and an old Targaryen bastard as well. The Green Seers, I mean, to me that's
because
where...
we've seen that Melisandre recognizes the connection between the direwolves and Jon, so that she knows there's something about that connection.
Not just knows there's something about that connection. She was able
to disrupt it.
Yeah, she was able to disrupt the connection between Jon and
so
Ghost.
Could she communicate with Ghost to such a level that she realizes, oh, Jon's in there. This is awkward. His body is dead.
Yeah.
Okay, I can probably fix the body with a sacrifice, but I should probably not do that until I can get him back home. That seems like perhaps...
Does that need another? Does Ghost have to die to free Jon's spirit? There's a lot of questions, a lot of interesting questions. So, and I think the main takeaway from this is that even if a literal death isn't needed for a life to return, something dies, you're transformed, you're changed in some way, inevitably by this happening. So,
well, I can see sort of a way around that with the Jon Ghost scenario. Well, or rather, let's say that a sacrifice is required to bring his body back. That doesn't necessarily... I still think that... I mean, we know that because Varamir has also indicated that if you spend a long time in an animal, you are affected by that. So let's say Jon hangs out in Ghost for a month or two, maybe, before they're
Yeah.
able to arrange a situation where he can be transferred back into his body and his body resurrected, or vice versa.
Sure.
Um,
He might be quite...
he might be quite changed. So whether, even if they had to sacrifice someone for his body, Jon will be affected, I think, by having spent that much time in an animal.
Yeah, that's also a possibility.
You lose some of your humanity.
True, he would have lost. Yes,
From doing that.
Yeah,
That's the warning about don't stay for skin changes. Don't stay with your animals too long. You will start losing parts of your humanity. You will start taking on traits of the animal.
yeah. I could certainly see that as a...
I think that's very... We've had that warning a lot of times.
Yes, Jojen from Clash of Kings is telling Bran, and we've got Varmir being told.
So that seems very likely that that's going to play a part.
Yeah.
Maybe the warning wasn't about Bran all along. It's Jon who's going to suffer the effects of that, in fact.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. So, with that, I think we're done discussing
I think
this.
we've more or less covered all the mostly
Rotations.
dead, no longer dead people. It's
very interesting to see how it plays out in the Winds of Winter. I mean, we take it as a given Jon's returning in the books.
there's just too much setup.
This is too much setup, but I mean, he's dead, but he'll come back.
Yeah.
But there has to be, and I mean, it fits what George says. There has to be some costs, whether in life or in the transformation of who the person is when they come back. There has to be something that makes it compelling, and it's not just, oh, la di da. He's he's just fine. It's exactly the same. So.
Yeah.
It'll be
And I mean, I think we're taking it for a given, and I think it's safe to say that he's in Ghost. I can't see.
No.
That's one of those things that I'm very certain of.
Just from looking at it from a authorial perspective, I mean, that prologue, introducing in quite a lot of detail this concept.
Exactly.
It's a little bit of a Chekhov's gun kind of thing. Where
obviously there are going to be people who say that George stole that from Robin Hobb.
There's some similarity, and Robin Hobb's first year books, yes, fits chivalry does.
But I think this is something that he had planned for a long time.
Yeah, no.
So.
All right. Until then, I don't know. Are we going to do that final Duncan Egg video this week as well, or? Yes,
unless something, with a good connection shows up for episode 4 that we can. Make as a topic, Song of Ice and Fire topic for next video. We might just go for the final Duncan.
No. I mean, in addition to,
we're
gonna. I think you want to continue doing some sort of Ice and Fire commentary. Okay. But my question is: are we gonna aim for Duncan Egg this week or next week?
That is a very good question. I think
we'll see. We'll have to see exactly what's going on, because we have things. We have a dog show. This weekend. So okay. So next video people will be seeing then will be your review of episode 4 on Monday at some point.
Yes.
And then
it might be either the Duncan Egg sometime next, or our next sort of related A Song of Ice and Fire commentary.
Yeah, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
So until then, have fun.